very warm welcome. You're joining us here at Hyde Park, and tonight on the show, we thought of talking about Japan, Sri Lanka, investments, trade, and Sri Lanka's journey towards becoming a developed nation with the economic development on par with other developed countries. We have with us here tonight, of course, the Sri Lankan ambassador to Japan during his visit here in Sri Lanka, in line with a key investment that is coming into the country. A very warm welcome, Ambassador Sanjiv Gunasekara.
Thank you, Indeewari.
It's very nice to see you. We don't usually see our foreign diplomats, our diplomats posted in our missions abroad here at Hyde Park unless we visit you in your respective countries. So it's nice to see you here.
Pleasure to be with you.
Yes. So there's a lot of work going on between Sri Lanka and Japan. I think you're looking at promoting trade. I remember having the foreign secretary here at Hyde Park who said there's an aggressive plan. The missions are brought together. For the first time in Sri Lanka, we have a foreign policy, a document in place, a written document for the first time in our history. So tell me what you're working on now.
Well, the foreign policy doctrine currently is foreign relations through economic relations. So economic relations are a priority for Sri Lanka, and that is our doctrine on the economic side. So with this, investments to Sri Lanka in this current juncture is very important with the foreign exchange situation. We break it down to two sections: the public investments and the private sector investment. On the public sector investment, we go through agencies like JICA for funding. And I'm happy to mention that after 7 years, JICA Director General visited Sri Lanka last week. So our funding is on the up and up. They were looking at, they looked at 3 or 4 large new projects to commence, in addition to the current projects that are continuing. And also I'm happy to say I'm here because we are hoping to receive Marubeni today. And green energy, and with the Vistas of Prosperity, 70% renewable energy plan by His Excellency the President, that sounds and fits very well with the Japanese economy and the vision. So that has rung a bell in Japan, and I hope with Marubeni's visit and with a commitment from Marubeni, there will be many other private investments that will follow, and some of which that we have been working for the last few months.
From Japan?
From Japan to Sri Lanka.
Tell us a little about Marubeni, their interest, and how we're going to look at supporting them here in Sri Lanka. I suppose you are the key bridge here between this investment. Well,
support is the key word. Bringing Marubeni to Sri Lanka is only part of the puzzle. So with that said, Marubeni is a $67 billion revenue company, over 100 years old. It's a blue chip Japanese company. They are a trading house, and now they are a conglomerate. Their biggest piece of their revenues is the power generation, and that breaks down to solar and wind power. And they are in 27 countries. Saying that they are looking at a 200 megawatt wind power project in Mannar, off the coast of Mannar. And also their head of power generation is also coming today. And they'll be looking at other feasible solar power and floating solar power projects in Sri Lanka.
Very green, eco-friendly investments, if I may say. But what is the extent of the investment, and how are we looking at this directly impacting the community here?
Well, it being the 200 megawatt wind power project is estimated to cost somewhere around $375 million. So this is a PPP, a private-public partnership, where it'll come back to the government in 20 years. So the impact is wind. And Mannar, the wind direction in Mannar is one of the few places in the world, apparently, the wind direction doesn't change much. So the efficiency is very high. And there's minimal cost after the initial capital outlay for generation of electricity. So this is what we hope, that we can bring the cost of electricity down for Sri Lanka.
How long have you been the ambassador there in Japan?
To be exact, about 11 months. I took responsibility on the 6th of January.
And I understand you were earlier based in the US.
That's correct.
Right. Your family is there?
That's correct.
How does that work for you all?
Well, it's a sacrifice you make, and we decided as a family to make this sacrifice for Sri Lanka.
But you're a successful businessman there, and you're here in Sri Lanka, of course, bringing investments here to the country, but there in Japan. But how does that support you from being a business person, very successful in what you do, and then in Japan? It's a diplomatic mission for your country. You're trying to promote the country, but is that a challenge? Do you have all the support you need to do what you do in your business?
Well, that's what the sacrifice is. That's why my wife couldn't join me. She had to stay back, and there's another family member involved in the business. So that's why she is back in LA, and I'm doing what I can do for the country. That gave me a free education.
So does this, your position as a business person, does it help you in running the diplomatic mission there in Japan?
The experience, sure it does, but nothing else.
Let me talk a little about Japan-Sri Lanka trade. We've been talking about a possible free trade agreement, a comprehensive economic partnership agreement. We've had talks with India, Singapore, and Japan has been one of Sri Lanka's strongest trading partners, but none of this trade is in favor of us, the island nation. What are the challenges you see in your 11 months as the ambassador leading our mission? What challenges do you see in Sri Lanka moving ahead in expanding our trade with Japan?
Yes, so that's a good question. Comprehensive economic partnership, that's the word for Japan. Japan, even between the ASEAN countries, Japan has a comprehensive economic partnership. They are negotiating that partnership further with India, and they are already looking with Bangladesh for 2026 when they elevate themselves from a less developed country. Now Sri Lanka being already elevated as a less developed, from being a less developed country, our tariffs have gone high. So just a comparison is the apparel trade, where we have 8 to 12% tariff, and Bangladesh has a 0% tariff, and they export $1.3 billion of apparel compared to Sri Lanka's 59 million. Though Sri Lanka is much higher in the quality and value-added chain in the garment manufacturing arena. So this is something garments and tea, packaged tea, which we are taxed at about 12%, are two areas that we can excel if we have a preferred trade agreement or a free trade agreement. But there's a sentiment that Sri Lanka, being a small country, a comprehensive free trade agreement might not benefit Sri Lanka. So that's up to the experts to decide. But these are two products that we will see immediate results in the apparel sector and the tea sector, which are very vibrant and which is very profitable for Sri Lanka in foreign exchange, if we can get some kind of a preferred trade agreement selected.
What factors would be in favor of Sri Lanka? Because we know as at present, Japanese imports, or rather exports to Sri Lanka, are far larger than what we export to Japan, and there's a massive trade gap also. Although yes, Bangladesh exports more in apparel. Apparel is still the dominant export from Sri Lanka to Japan, amounting to some 24.9% of our exports. But how would you look at this being in favor of Sri Lanka, especially when Japan is still on the positive side in the trade balance?
So just to give you an example, Sri Lanka's annual exports are about 190 million. Imports, depending on the year, because the 80% of the imports is the automotive. It hovers between 800 million and a billion imports. And out of that, 80% is automotive. So this being so skewed, Sri Lanka I think, should stand a chance as a exclusive trading partner with Japan, and this being the trade imbalance being so skewed that we can negotiate a selected preferential trade agreement where if we get the tariffs down to about 2% on the apparel, we could see our apparel exports from 59 million go to $1 billion in a matter of 2 to 3 years. Because our apparel industry is so vibrant, so dynamic. It's just when it's a 8% disadvantage, that is more than your profit margin in this competitive trade. Tea is the other one, packaged tea. Packaged tea we are at 12%, whereas Bangladesh, India is 0%. So that's another one. These two key products can balance our imbalanced free trade.
When you say packaged tea, we've been talking for a long time about value addition to our teas. What is the market like there in Japan for value-added teas? Value-added
teas is the way to go. We've been about in volume, 80% of the tea still we export is in bulk. When we export it in bulk, it becomes more of a commodity. But if we export it in package, especially with our brand name and with our logo, with our Ceylon tea logo, where it can only be packaged in Sri Lanka, then we control our destiny. And there are majority of the Japanese consumer values the Sri Lanka tea. But with the blending that has been going on in Japan and overseas, that has somewhat diminished. So this is a way, if we send a packaged tea from Sri Lanka with our logo, pure Ceylon tea logo, I think that will resuscitate and give us way more value addition.
I'm trying to learn a little more about the Japanese market through you, since you're there. You say there's preference for packaged tea, and the Japanese, the consumer, has a preference for Ceylon tea, the Ceylon tea brand. Just walk us through the market there. What is it? What products of Sri Lanka stand a better chance there than in the local market?
You know, Japanese consumer is a quality, brand-oriented consumer. They have the purchasing power. So Ceylon tea has been branded in the world as the best quality tea available. If we have the best quality tea, we need to package it. We need to package it, and we need the person who buys a box of tea to be privileged and pay that 20% extra, because it's Ceylon tea. It's pure Ceylon tea. When it's blended and they don't have that logo, they don't pay that. So this is the branding, and we should pay more attention to this branding and also get us a even playing field where it's not a 15% disadvantage. And then we go to apparel. We are considered one of the best apparel manufacturers in the world. Our biggest markets are US and EU. So Japan is another. When I sell Sri Lanka in Japan, I say I feel bad for the Japanese consumer, because the Japanese consumer is losing out on first grade, first quality Sri Lankan apparel.
I think as of 2020, Japan was Sri Lanka's 12th largest exporter. But you say branding is a problem, but what other challenges do we see in slowly pushing this number up towards where USA is?
I think it's I've had this conversation a few times with stakeholders. I think giving more attention, being proactive, participating now with video conferencing. We can do so many things without having to spend so much capital outlay. We can do so many connecting. 2 weeks ago, we connected 265 Japanese outbound tourists directly with Sri Lanka inbound tour operators. So these are things just like that, connecting tea importers directly, participating in more exhibitions. These are things that just being...
I'd like to talk a little about country promotion right after this short break here at Hyde Park. conversation with the Sri Lankan ambassador in Japan, Sanjiv Gunasekara. Ambassador, you were talking about branding, promotion of Sri Lanka there in Japan, but do you think there's sufficient brand promotion, destination promotion when it comes to Sri Lanka there in Japan? Does the Japanese average consumer or the high-end market, let's talk about the high-end consumer, are they aware of what we have to offer?
So I think in the tea branding, I think in the tea branding we can for sure improve, but on the apparel sector we just need to negotiate a better tariff. And then Sri Lanka as a destination, tourist destination, that's our next product. And that's something we've been pushing, and we have categorized Sri Lanka as a wellness Ayurvedic destination, ecotourism, and then the cultural and the Buddhist aspect. So those are the three main areas that we focus on, and for the Japanese consumer. And I think as soon as things open up, we will see in 2019 there were 50,000 Japanese tourists. I think that number could be well exceeded. And we hope.
Is it the high-end tourist market that we are targeting?
Yes, well, Japanese tourists mostly are the high-end, But this glory has been now shared with Maldives. So we need to be, with the positive articles, positive ratings that we have got from all the major international travel magazines, we need to set the high bar. As the chairman tourism board very correctly mentioned, we need to set the high bar, and we need to improve our service levels, so we can, because as a destination we do have all the ingredients in place to bring that high-end tourists.
How does the mission in Tokyo plan to work with the authorities here in supporting this push forward, because tourism is opening up now after a long period of restrictions, not just here in Sri Lanka but across the world for travel restrictions as a result of this pandemic. But how are you working together with authorities here? What's the plan in place?
As I mentioned, 2 weeks ago was our first ever direct connection of the outbound tour operators with the inbound tour operators in Sri Lanka. And with that we had the tourism authority, Chairman Kimali Fernando, and also Sri Lankan. We partnered with Sri Lankan Airlines. The chairman also spoke, and Sri Lankan gave a presentation on the connectivity, because we had 3 direct flights now, and with things opening up we hope to get the 4th flight.
Right.
So with that, this was the first step. Now we hope to every 2 to 3 months have a working seminar, basically educating the tour groups, the tour operators, on the promotions that Sri Lankan hotel chains and the Sri Lankan tour operators are offering. With that, it's a 2-prong attack. Also, we promote Sri Lanka. We have different promotions on the wildlife, the leopards, the elephants. The highest density of elephants in the world is in Sri Lanka. So these are things that we highlight. We take a program and we highlight one item. And we try to do that every month. We have 2 programs going from the embassy.
Since diplomatic ties were established between Japan and Sri Lanka, I think Japan has a soft corner for Sri Lanka when it comes to diplomatic ties. We take pride in talking about it. But again, do we do enough to utilize this soft corner that Japan has? Japan is ready to help Sri Lanka, they say. But then again, are we antagonizing Japan in any way with the way we manage and balance our superpowers? As the ambassador there, as the mission head, how do you read this?
To answer the first part of the question, I think Japan is an untapped friend. Japan and Sri Lanka's friendship is a unique one. That's what I say when I give my speeches. Why? Because Japan and Sri Lanka friendship is not because for politics or geopolitics, defense or trade. We've been friends going back to 1893, but in the recent history, in 1951, when Sri Lanka stood up for Japan at the San Francisco Peace Conference, and Sri Lanka was the voice for whole of Asia. And Japan knows that it's taught in the curriculum at schools, and that's the soft corner that Japan has for Sri Lanka. And with that, I feel we can do more constructively to enhance Japan's kindness and generosity towards Sri Lanka. And in this regard, that's what the mission and myself, we've been working on, and I think we are starting to see the fruits of it with the DG JICA coming last week, and now the private sector following suit.
What is Japan's sentiment when it comes to Sri Lanka's pivot towards China?
I share with them. Their sentiments are, it's like a good friend, but we try to set the record straight that we need borrowing, we need the help, and sometimes Sri Lanka has to make difficult decisions when they have bad choices. So when I speak to the Japanese official, what I say is, please give us better choices, and that's where your opportunity to help Sri Lanka. Because with the Paris Agreement, they insist we have to be a part of, engage with the IMF. And my example is, we cannot, just because we use Ayurvedic, you cannot refuse us the Western medicine, or vice versa. So we have Sri Lanka's economic policy currently mimics Japan's economic policies in the 60s. It was a government-controlled open economic policy. And that's why they created these big companies that had the deep pockets who can invest for the longer term. And Sri Lanka, we need that. So that's why when we speak to the Japanese officials, the economists, we say, please, Sri Lanka was there for Japan. This is the time we need your assistance, and this is the time the valuations are down.
You said Japan says bad choices. You say give us better choices. But what is the response here? How is Japan looking at engaging with Sri Lanka to give us better choices if what Sri Lanka makes are bad choices?
It's basically minimize the preconditions, lend us money on lucrative projects, encourage the private investments to come to Sri Lanka, have the JBIC guarantee their investments. JBIC is their Export Development Bank. Have them guarantee the private sector's investment. Have JICA look at the good projects and be forthcoming. So this is what we need, the Japanese help.
Does that mean also that here in Sri Lanka that we are not forthcoming, that Sri Lanka's either there is bureaucracy or there is red tape or there is some kind of, or there are bottlenecks here in Sri Lanka that prevents Japanese investments from coming in as much as they like or as much as you wish to bring them here to Sri Lanka?
Well, maybe sometimes the information is not forthcoming or not as transparent as we would like it to be, and that's why that's part of the reason the Japanese bureaucracy nudges Sri Lanka to be part of the IMF, because when you are, at least when you are engaged with the IMF, you are supposed to share your macroeconomic indicators. So in short of engaging with the IMF, then we need to be transparent with our macroeconomic indicators and our forecasts with the governments that we are seeking funds from. So this is, there is sometimes there are issues with the lack of information, but we are working through that. And then there's a lack of, there is a perception issue. That's what we need to overcome, the perception issue. So the perception is something that after cancellation of some of the mega projects, the taste was not good. But now the communication between the upper echelon of the Sri Lankan government and Japan has been excellent. And I think we are looking very positively in the next years to come.
So does that mean we will see some big investments in the country? Are they in the pipeline? Give us an idea about what's happening.
Yeah, as I said, the JICA, for a little while, JICA, they were not looking at new projects, but as the DG was here, he had some very positive meetings, and they are looking at a few projects. So this will take some time to materialize, but there are like 13 or 14 projects that are currently ongoing. And with JICA being here, the private sector takes cue. If JICA is here, then they follow. And METI is the Ministry of Economic, Trade and Investment. They are also looking at Sri Lanka now positively with the information that we have been sharing. Through my mission, the information we've been sharing, and JBIC, we've been engaged with the JBIC one-on-one. So with these initiatives, I think we will see, and I've been working with 4 major public Japanese companies, and I think with Marubeni coming being the first one, I think there will be a few more to follow.
What sectors do you think are more likely to invest in Sri Lanka, or what sectors in Sri Lanka are more likely to attract Japanese investments?
The most favorite sector right now is the renewable energy sector. There are 2 to 3 companies that are interested in the renewable energy sector. Also, then these are the top 30 Japanese companies, listed companies. Then there are a couple of companies looking at the organic agriculture arena, agricultural, also the organic fertilizer, that arena. And then there are a couple of companies that are looking at investing in Port City, construction, multi-family residential towers. So these are areas that we have been working on, promoting, and I think we will see some movement in the near future.
You did mention about the port city, and this has been a controversial topic, and China has been a controversial topic, especially when we talk about the United States, India and Japan. In discussing this power struggle of the superpowers or influence in the region, how does the mission manage this? Because you're representing Sri Lanka in Japan, and there's significant interest in Sri Lanka for investment in terms of our geopolitical position and also the diplomatic scenario.
Yes. How I think is, this is Japan's opportunity now. Sri Lankan government, we are neutral. We are a foreign policy is neutrality with India first. That's a part of our vistas of prosperity doctrine. With that said, with the Quad, I think Japan is in a very, very envious position, because Japan is one of the most favored countries in Sri Lanka. Most parties, or all parties, love Japan. So with Japan having a very favorable rating from all sections of society, our population, this is how I promote Sri Lanka to Japan, is that this is their opportunity to invest, because there is no political negativities or investment of any, there is no major negativities with Japan. So this, I think, is ringing a bell, and I think with the upper echelon of the Sri Lankan government also being very proactive, I think we will see movement again.
Something I also wanted to ask you was about the grievances of the Sri Lankan businessmen, business community there in Japan, who have been, who with their counterparts here in Sri Lanka have been heavily involved in the lucrative automobile business. This has been ongoing for a while until our vehicle import restrictions were in effect as a result of the forex crisis Sri Lanka faces with the height of the pandemic. But what is the representation like there, and how does Japan also get involved with Sri Lanka in this regard?
Well, a significant part of Sri Lankan businessmen, their business is exporting used cars. But what this pandemic has done is most of them has retooled or retooled not only to export to Sri Lanka. Most of the used automotive exporters, they export to other countries around the world. I think as a country, Sri Lankan automotive exporters are one of the largest, though we are one of the smaller countries, are the largest exporters. It's very vibrant. It's a very vibrant group of people. Yes, it has hurt them, but they are withstanding it by diversifying the exports to many other countries, and also I've been encouraging them to diversify from not only being automotive, but also going to parts, going to other industrial equipment where Sri Lanka has not Sri Lanka has not barred, because we are still open to agricultural equipment and industrial equipment. Also, we need the service parts. And then also to look at some of these parts can be manufactured in Sri Lanka. Rubber. Sri Lanka is considered the rubber manufacturing hub in the world. We export a big portion of the solid tire market of the world. We export over $1 billion to EU and the US markets. So these bushings, rubber parts, to look at manufacturing in Sri Lanka and to import it back to Japan. So these are things that's a very because
our foreign exchange outflow, to restrict that outflow also and support an inflow of foreign exchange to the country, I think, to get our community involved in this. But how are they looking at it? We have to look at establishing ventures here in Sri Lanka that will support a bigger export market for Sri Lanka there in Japan. How are you engaging with the Sri Lankan business community there, and what other facilities, infrastructure facilities and support will our community, business community there especially need to create that export economy for Sri Lanka?
Yeah, I think in that lieu, some concessions or tax holidays, just like for foreigners, for foreign companies, having some structured tax holidays dedicated to Sri Lankan expatriates would be a good policy to start with, because there are Sri Lankan expatriates, I can talk for Japan, who are looking at investing and doing something for the country. So having some tax holidays or some incentives, additional incentives, will push them over the wait and see approach. So those are things that we need to target and we can pursue, and those are being written up and talked about.
What's the general sentiment about investment, the investment climate in Sri Lanka? I know I come back to this because we talk a lot about how the international business community is looking at Sri Lanka. There's question whether Sri Lanka's policy consistency, whether there is policy consistency, whether their investments are safe in Sri Lanka. What is the sentiment in Japan?
Well, policy consistency is needed. Stability is needed for any investor. So even for Sri Lankan expatriates, they are looking at that. But currently, we being a democracy, and democracy, I think the second longest democracy in Asia, and we having an investment agreement between Japan and Sri Lanka guarantees somewhat the investments. But policy consistency will help to build that confidence, and some country-specific policies for sure will help to build the confidence and to move some of these investors who are on the fence to make that decision and make it happen.
I think it's time we take a short commercial break here at Hyde Park. Do stay with us. Welcome back. We are in conversation with the mission head of Sri Lanka there in Japan, Ambassador Sanjiv Gunasekara. Ambassador, we were talking at length about investments, imports from Japan to Sri Lanka, and also about how Sri Lanka can expand on our export economy and target Japan as our source market. But we have to face the fact that Sri Lanka faces a foreign exchange crisis, and remittances per se have reduced 50% during this pandemic time, because there have been other sources of how remittances were sent into the country. But is there a solution we can seek from Japan in terms of expanding our coffers?
Well, one primary solution is there's even a ministry that was created called Employment Market Diversification under the Ministry of Labour. But the intention was to, I think Japan is one of the priority countries with South Korea and EU countries to diversify our skilled workers from the Middle East region to these more higher paying regions. So Japan has a program called the SSW program, Specialized Skilled Worker Program, because Japan has an aging population and their population has been reducing, as a matter of fact. So the birth rates are less than the deaths. So with this, there's an aging population and there's a demand for certain fields. And Japan has identified 14 areas where they need skilled workers. With that, Sri Lanka, for the first time, they are administrating exams in the fields of caregiving and servicing industry, restaurant servicing. So these are the starting salary on these jobs are 200,000 yen, which is approximately 400,000 rupees without overtime. So that's a very high earning potential. And the requirements are you have to have a second level, which is N4 qualification, second level language qualified, and you got to pass these exams. So these exams are going to be offered starting in February, and if you pass the exam and you got the language qualification, there are enough jobs available, and the mission is directly involved with the employers to connect these suitable and qualified skilled workers to come to Japan.
So this program will be in effect starting February next year?
This program has been in effect for the last 2 years, but this Sri Lanka, with the mission working tirelessly, was the 6th country that Japan authorized to have the exams, because they normally give priority to the ASEAN.
So for Sri Lanka, it's starting February, is it?
For the first time, it's starting for these 2 subjects only. There are about 80 subjects in total that we can qualify. So these 2 subjects are the start, and we are working on at least another 6 to 8 subjects during the next months for them to authorize to have.
Does that mean we will see a shift of our skilled workers from the Middle East or from that part of the region to the East Asian region?
Well, numbers wise, is not as big as Middle East. Our initial target is to send at least 5,000 skilled workers to Japan, compared to the hundreds of thousands in the Middle East. But that's a start, because you send one person to Japan, that will take care of a family. That's the motto, because of the high income levels. So we hope, our goal is in the next 2 years to get to the 5,000 skilled worker level, and then I think surpassing that is not an issue.
Right. I'd also like to talk a little about technology and know-how. We know how much of advancements Japan has made. We talk about Japanese technology, but we're also here talking about a shift to organic agriculture. And how can we look at not just technology know-how and innovations, the transfer of knowledge to Sri Lanka, but also a support to our organic, the endeavor to go organic?
Yes. This is a field that Japan is very advanced and very versant with. So organic, Japan is not 100% organic, but their chemical usage is very, very stringent. So Japan is very versant with organic cultivation, and actually the mission has been working closely with some of the Japanese researchers and Japanese organic producing fertilizing companies to entice them to come and open shop in Sri Lanka. So we are actually working with 2 specific research groups that we are enticing them to come to Sri Lanka to create the ingredients necessary to create the organic fertilizer. Because these things cannot be imported, they are supposed to be grown or created within the Sri Lankan ecosystem. So we are working closely, and we are connecting them to the correct partners locally.
There was also an interest in Buddhist culture, education from Japan here in Sri Lanka. What is that like? Yes,
Buddhism, Theravada Buddhism, history states Theravada Buddhism was brought to Japan from Sri Lanka in 1893 by Anagarika Dharmapala and Colonel Olcott. So when you talk about Buddhism, Sri Lanka is considered one of the Mecca of Buddhism, and that's what the Japanese think. And so there are many Buddhist-centric, cultural-centric tours that are in Japan, and as we open up, we are promoting that.
So we will have a better chance of attracting more Japanese tourists to our cultural tourism aspects.
Absolutely, absolutely. And there are many large Japanese temples that are very connected with Sri Lankan temples. So we use that ecosystem to promote Sri Lanka as a cultural and a religious destination.
There was something else I wanted to also touch on. You were quite instrumental in raising over $250,000 during the time of tsunami for Sri Lanka. You played an instrumental role there, and there were also, you're a philanthropist, if I may say. But here is a time that Sri Lanka needs funds, especially foreign exchange. Apart from the investments, apart from the trade that we're pushing forward for, it needs time. How can we actually look at, make an effort to maybe bring our expat community together to invest in Sri Lanka or to support Sri Lanka here for our journey out of this current situation?
Yes. I want to say a couple of the things that we did, which were milestones. We raised 25 million yen, approximately 50 million rupees in April, when the need was there for the COVID-19 and the oxygen concentrators, etc. I think that was one of the largest amounts raised in one time, and it was mainly with the generosity of the Sri Lankan diaspora. Saying that, we have been working with large Buddhist temples who have good connections with Sri Lanka, and also actually just a few weeks ago I met the chairman of the Sasakawa Foundation, which has very fond and close connections with Sri Lanka. Sasakawa Foundation is, there is a foundation in Sri Lanka, and it is the largest philanthropic foundation in Japan. And the chairman himself has fond memories and close ties to Sri Lanka. So we gave a letter from His Excellency the President inviting him to visit Sri Lanka. He is the peace ambassador currently to Myanmar, just like Ambassador Akashi was to Sri Lanka. So we have invited him to come to Sri Lanka, and these large temples, when the we need more, we are working close with them. We are formulating some projects to connect these temples with the Sri Lankans.
Right, and we have very fond memories of Ambassador Yasushi Akashi.
Yes, exactly.
Yes. On a personal note again, is it very challenging to work as an ambassador there? We're talking about challenging times, a pandemic. Everyone, the international community is well aware of Sri Lanka. All eyes are on Sri Lanka, especially when we talk about trade and investment. And you're in one of a key country, especially when we talk about China, the United States, India and Japan. We seem to see that a growing relationship between the US, India, Japan, and there's China too, heavily involved in Sri Lanka. But what is it like for you to be the Sri Lankan ambassador there in Japan?
Well, life is a challenge, and being an ambassador is a challenge. But you look at the positives. You take this, you compartmentalize Sri Lanka and Japan's relationship, and you look at the positives and you sell the positives. And with Japan and Sri Lanka's relationship, I am convinced there are so many positives, unique positives, that we just have to work on it, and we got to get the message across that Sri Lanka is the place for Japanese investment.
Thank you very much for your time here with us, Ambassador Gunasekara. We had a lovely chat.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
We had with us the Sri Lankan ambassador in Japan, Ambassador Sanjiv Gunasekara, joining us here at Hyde Park to talk about investments, trade, and of course tourism with Japan. Have a pleasant evening. Good night.